Congressman Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for this unusual, unique, but very important bicameral hearing, I think, which underscores the threat that we face here. In February, President Trump issued the America First Investment Policy Memorandum that directs federal agencies to address outbound investment into China. Congress has been focused on this issue in multiple Congresses, and in this Congress, I've introduced the Fight China Act, formerly known as the COINS Act, to prevent outbound investments into Chinese military and surveillance companies. The Fight China Act also aligns with the President's memorandum by taking both an entity-based approach and a technology-based approach. This is important because sanctions do provide a multilateral effect, but not all civil-military fusion happens with just listed entities. We've seen quite a bit of venture capital and private equity flows into private, non-listed entities, and therefore a technology focus is important. Mr. Iacovella, can you discuss why a law that prohibits U.S. outbound investment into both specific entities is needed, but also clearly defined technologies of national security concern? Why is that second piece so important?
Thank you for the question, and we supported your legislation, and we like the approach that you've taken because we always thought that you can turn up the dial on specific companies, but you needed to attack the entire sectors that are posing a national security threat. And there's more than just public capital, as you said, that's going over there. It's private capital, venture capital, private equity, and public capital that's going over there. But what's even more of an issue is that you have companies that are subsidiaries of subsidiaries of subsidiaries, and maybe the parents on one of the DoD lists or the entity list, and you can't get to them unless you prohibit the sectoral investment in those Chinese companies. And so I appreciate your approach. I think you've threaded the needle there, and we strongly support it.
We want to give the private sector the red light, green light approach, but we think we can get at this problem and accomplish that by clearly defining the technologies of concern. Mr. O'Leary, the Fight China Act, this bill that I've introduced, requires the Treasury Department to regularly review whether companies on U.S. government blacklists, such as Commerce Export Controls, sanctions, DoD lists, whether they should be added to this Treasury CMIC list, the investment blacklist for Chinese military industrial firms. List coordination is necessary to ensure we treat entities consistently. Can you touch on how alignment within these various government prohibitions of Chinese entities eases the compliance burden for U.S. firms to determine whether or not they can invest in China?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great challenges. You don't want to go through the cost of starting a deal or an investment and doing the diligence on it only to find out that it's going to breach this law. And so it's almost like a Sisyphus issue. You don't know the outcome till you test it. And so if there was a better way to do that where, particularly in a larger transaction, where they could just come to staff and say, look, we want to invest $1 billion in this thing. Is it going to pass or not? Or do we actually have to test it?
Yeah, and we have a provision in the bill that would allow for that guidance for investors.
That would be the very best thing to do, because then on a no-names basis, you can just go in and say, look, there's a very material transaction. If you're not okay with it, just tell me now. Because nobody wants to, burdening it with litigation, which has been a problem lately, is not the answer. Just yes or no.
Right.
That's much easier.
Yeah, and I think we threaded that needle by not having kind of a reverse Sisyphus, but it's a clear red light, green light system there. Mr. Iacovella, in your testimony, you refer to passive index loophole and state that there are more than 2,000 U.S. mutual and exchange traded funds that have $294 billion invested across Chinese stocks and bonds. The concern, obviously, is that American investors may be unwittingly financing the Chinese military industrial complex. Can you explain how the Fight China Act would curtail that loophole?
I think the Fight China Act would go a long way to curtailing the loophole, but I also think there needs to be a straight prohibition, because what you'll find is that New York lawyers are going to come down here and they're going to try to create loopholes to the loophole, and they're going to interfere with what it is that you're trying to do, which is very novel, in stopping our money from going and funding the Chinese Communist Party's technological and military rise, as well as their funding of the surveillance state, which aids and abets the internment of Uyghurs. So I think that your bill does a lot, and I think that it goes a long way, but it needs to be much broader because the CCP owns a stake in everything.
Great, thank you. Yield back.